Have you ever walked through your old high school after all the students have gone home? Or sat in an empty airport terminal at 3 in the morning? If you have, you know the feeling. The air feels heavy. The silence is so loud, it rings in your ears. You feel a deep, primitive unease in your stomach, as if you are standing somewhere you are not supposed to be. Psychologists call these places liminal spaces. They are areas designed for massive crowds and constant movement. But when you strip away the people, the true nature of the building is revealed. It becomes an empty, hollow shell, and nature hates a vacuum. When a place is left empty for too long, something else will inevitably move in to fill the void. Welcome to Liminal Nightmares. Over the next hour, we are going to explore the terrifying true stories of the people who work the graveyard shift in massive, empty, urban structures. This is Chapter 1, The Midnight Mall. The American shopping mall is a dying breed. Across the country, massive 2 million square foot monuments to consumerism are slowly rotting away. But before they are fully abandoned, many of them sit empty for years, guarded by a skeleton crew of overnight security. In the winter of 2019, a 23-year-old named Michael got a job working the night shift at a massive, failing indoor mall in Ohio. 90% of the stores were permanently closed, their metal security gates pulled down over dark, empty windows. Michael's job was simple. From midnight to 8 in the morning, he had to walk the 3 floors of the empty mall, checking the locked doors of the remaining stores and making sure no homeless people had broken in to sleep in the food court. For the first few weeks, the job was just incredibly boring. The only sound was the squeak of his rubber shoes on the polished tile floor, and the low, constant hum of the massive industrial air conditioners. But liminal spaces have a way of playing tricks on your mind. When you stare down a hallway that is a quarter-mile long, lit by flickering fluorescent lights, your brain starts to look for patterns in the shadows. It was a Tuesday night in late November. The mall was completely dead. Michael was on the 2nd floor, walking past an old, abandoned department store. The glass doors were chained shut. Inside, the massive sales floor was pitch black, filled with dozens of naked plastic mannequins left behind by the company. As Michael walked past the dark glass, he stopped. He heard a sound. It was faint, echoing through the empty corridor. It sounded like music. Specifically, it sounded like the cheerful, upbeat elevator music that the mall used to play on the overhead speakers during the day. But the mall's sound system had been broken and disconnected for over 3 years. Michael unclipped his heavy flashlight from his belt. He walked slowly back to the glass doors of the abandoned department store. He pressed his ear against the cold glass. The music was definitely coming from inside the dark store. It sounded warped, like a cassette tape playing at the wrong speed. Michael shined his flashlight through the glass. The powerful beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dusty floor and the clusters of pale, headless mannequins. Nothing was moving. He pulled out his master key ring, unlocked the heavy chain, and pushed the glass doors open. He had to make sure teenagers had not broken in with a boombox. He stepped into the pitch-black department store. The smell of dust and old perfume was overwhelming. The warped music echoed off the high ceiling, making it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from. Michael walked slowly down the main aisle, sweeping his flashlight left and right. He passed a group of 5 mannequins standing in a circle. Their pale plastic skin reflected the light. He walked all the way to the back of the store, checking the old fitting rooms. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors one by one. Empty. 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 The music suddenly stopped. The silence hit Michael like a physical punch. He stood dead still in the dark fitting room corridor, listening to his own rapid heartbeat. He keyed his radio. He whispered, "Bass. This is Michael. I am in the old department store. There is no one here. I am coming back out." The radio hissed with static, but there was no reply. Michael turned around and started walking back toward the front entrance of the store. He swept his flashlight beam down the long, dark aisle toward the glass doors. He stopped walking. A cold sweat broke out across his entire body. When he had walked down this aisle 2 minutes ago, the group of 5 mannequins had been standing in a circle, facing each other. Now, all 5 mannequins were standing in a straight line, blocking the center of the aisle. And every single one of them had their plastic bodies turned to face him. Michael's hands shook so badly he almost dropped the flashlight. Mannequins do not move. They are bolted to heavy metal base plates. He told himself someone was playing a sick prank on him. Another security guard or a teenager hiding in the dark. He yelled out, trying to sound authoritative, "I see you. Come out right now, or I am calling the police." His voice echoed into the dark dot. No one answered. He had to get out of the store, but to reach the exit, he had to walk past the line of mannequins. He gripped his flashlight tightly, raised it like a weapon, and slowly walked forward. 10 feet, 5 feet. He squeezed past the plastic figures, keeping his eyes glued to them. Up close, they were covered in a thick layer of gray dust. He let out a shaky breath. He was past them. The glass exit doors were only 30 feet away, but as he took a step toward the exit, he heard a sound right behind his ear. It was a sharp, cracking sound, like dry ancient joints popping into place. Michael slowly turned around, shining his flashlight back at the mannequins. 4 of the mannequins were still facing the back of the store, but the 5th one, the one closest to him, had turned its head 180 degrees around to look at him. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The terrifying part was that the thick layer of gray dust on its face was disturbed, where the smooth, plastic mouth should have been. The dust was cracked and peeling away, revealing a set of perfectly human, yellowed teeth stretched into a massive, impossible smile. Michael didn't scream. His brain completely short-circuited. He turned and sprinted toward the glass doors, crashing through them into the brightly lit mall corridor. He didn't stop running until he was outside in the freezing parking lot, locked inside his car. He quit the next morning. He refused to even go back inside to return his uniform. The mall was finally demolished 2 years later. But the demolition crew reported something strange to the local news. When they cleared out the old department store, they found dozens of standard plastic mannequins, but among the plastic parts hidden in the rubble, the crew found a complete set of human remains, wired together with coat hangers, dressed in old clothes. When we walk through the brightly lit malls during the day, we feel safe, surrounded by the crowds. But when the lights go out and the people leave, the empty spaces do not stay empty for long. When we return in Chapter 2, we will leave the mall and descend into the absolute lowest level of the city, a place where the living are not allowed to go. The underground hospital morgue. Welcome back. In our first chapter, we explored the terrifying emptiness of a dying shopping mall. We saw what happens when plastic and dust are left alone in the dark. But a mall is just a place for things. What happens when the empty space is a place designed for people? Specifically, people who have already passed on. This is Chapter 2, The Underground Morgue. Hospitals are chaotic, brightly lit machines that never truly sleep. On the upper floors, there is always the beeping of monitors, the frantic rushing of nurses, and the hum of conversation. It is an environment completely dedicated to preserving life. But if you take the staff elevator all the way down, past the lobby, past the basement-level pharmacy, you reach sub-level 3. Sub-level 3 is the morgue, and down there, the chaos of the hospital disappears. It is replaced by a heavy, freezing, industrial silence. The air smells like a mix of strong bleach, old tile, and formaldehyde. Elias was a 26-year-old, overnight orderly at a large, older hospital in Chicago. His primary job was transporting medical supplies, but occasionally, he had to take the long ride down to sub-level 3 to deliver paperwork or transport a deceased patient. He hated the morgue. The hallway leading to the heavy metal double doors was nearly 200 feet long. To save electricity, the hospital had installed a motion sensor light in the ceiling. Normally, when you walk down a motion sensor hallway, the lights click on above you, creating a small bubble of safety in the dark. But it was a rainy Thursday night at 3 in the morning, and Elias was about to learn that motion sensors do not only detect the living, Elias stepped off the elevator on sub-level 3. He was holding a clipboard with routine transfer logs. The elevator doors slid shut behind him with a heavy mechanical clunk. He stood at the beginning of the long, dark corridor. He took his first step. Click. The first fluorescent square above his head flickered on, bathing him in harsh, pale white light. He took a few more steps. Click. The second light turned on. He walked halfway down the long hallway, the lights clicking on one by one as he passed underneath them. The lights behind him stayed on for about 30 seconds before automatically turning off, plunging the hallway behind him back into total darkness. Elias reached the heavy metal doors of the morgue. He scanned his ID badge. The magnetic lock beeped, and he pushed the heavy door open. The morgue itself was completely empty. The stainless steel tables were wiped clean. The wall of massive metal drawers where the bodies were kept was completely shut. The temperature in the room was a freezing 50 degrees. Elias shivered, walked over to the attendant's desk, and dropped his clipboard into the tray. He just wanted to get back to the elevator. He turned around to leave. But as he looked through the small wire mesh window of the morgue door, he froze. He had a clear view of the long hallway outside. The hallway he had just walked down. It was completely pitch black. The lights had timed out, just like they were supposed to. But as Elias watched through the glass, his hand resting on the heavy door handle, at the very far end of the hallway, near the elevator, the first motion sensor light suddenly clicked on. Click. Elias stopped breathing. He stared down the long corridor. There was no one standing under the light. The space was completely empty. A rat, he told himself. Just a large rat running across the floor. 10 seconds passed. Nothing happened. Elias let out a slow, shaky breath. He pushed the heavy metal door open and stepped back out into the dark hallway. He took one step. The light directly above him clicked on, and at that exact same moment, at the far end of the hallway, the second light clicked on. Click. Whatever had triggered the first light was moving closer to him. Elias stood perfectly still, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. The hallway was completely silent. There were no footsteps. There was no breathing. Just the low electrical buzz of the fluorescent bulbs. He took another step forward. The light above him clicked on, and 30 feet down the hall, coming from the darkness, the third light clicked on. Click. It was moving toward him, and it was moving fast, but there was absolutely nothing there. The hallway was completely empty. Elias couldn't take it anymore. He broke into a dead sprint toward the elevator. He ran as fast as he could, the lights above him rapidly clicking on in a frantic wave of harsh white light. He looked over his shoulder. The lights right behind him were turning on, one after another, chasing him down the corridor. Click, dot, click, click. Whatever was following him was completely invisible, and it was right on his heels. Elias crashed into the elevator doors, frantically smashing his bloody knuckles against the call button. The lights in the hallway behind him were all fully illuminated now. The invisible presence had stopped right at the edge of the elevator lobby. Elias turned around, pressing his back flat against the metal elevator doors. He stared out into the empty, brightly lit hallway, completely terrified. And then he noticed it. The air directly in front of him, just 3 feet away, was so incredibly cold that he could actually see his own breath pluming in the air. He wasn't alone. He was looking right at it. The elevator doors chimed and slid open behind him. He fell backward into the bright, safe elevator car, frantically pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors began to slowly slide shut, Elias looked out into the hallway one last time. The motion sensor lights began to turn off, one by one, starting from the far end near the morgue and moving rapidly toward the elevator. The darkness was swallowing the hallway, and right before the elevator doors closed completely, the light directly in front of him clicked off, leaving him staring into the pitch-black void. And from the dark, right outside the elevator doors, a raspy, whispering voice echoed through the narrow gap. It said, "Going up, Elias never worked the night shift again." The hospital management reviewed the security footage the next day. They saw Elias sprinting down the hallway, terrified of nothing. But when they checked the motion sensor logs, the technical team was completely silent. The sensors hadn't glitched. They had registered a massive, freezing cold mass, roughly the size of a human, following Elias all the way to the elevator. Liminal spaces are terrifying because they remind us of what is missing. But perhaps we shouldn't be afraid of the empty spaces. Perhaps we should be terrified of the things that use the emptiness to hide. When we return in Chapter 3, we will leave the city completely. We will travel to the bottom of the world, to a place where the sun doesn't rise for 6 months. A place where isolation isn't just a feeling. It is a death sentence. Welcome back. We have walked the empty halls of a dead mall. We have felt the chill of an underground morgue. Those places are terrifying because they are empty when they should be full. But what happens when the liminal space is not just a building, but an entire continent? This is Chapter 3, The Antarctic Night. Antarctica is the most isolated landmass on the planet. During the winter, the sun sets in April and does not rise again until October. For 6 straight months, the continent is plunged into absolute, freezing darkness. There are a few small research stations scattered across the ice, inhabited by a tiny skeleton crew known as the Winter Overteam. These stations are essentially spaceships parked on the ice. If you step outside without thermal gear, you will freeze to death in minutes. If there is a medical emergency, no helicopter can reach you. You are completely, utterly cut off from the rest of the human race. Station 42 was a small, older research facility. It consisted of 5 metal modules connected by long, corrugated steel tunnels. In the dead of winter, only 4 people were left on the station. 3 scientists and 1 communications officer named Marcus. It was August. They were 4 months into the total darkness. The psychological strain of the isolation, known as the winter over syndrome, was beginning to set in. Everyone was exhausted, irritable, and sleeping in shifts. It was 3 in the morning. A massive blizzard was raging outside, battering the metal walls of the station with hurricane-force winds. The temperature was 70 degrees below zero. Marcus was sitting alone in the main communications hub. The other 3 crew members were fast asleep in the residential module, located at the completely opposite end of the station. To get from the communications hub to the residential module, you had to walk through Tunnel C. It was a 300-foot-long, narrow metal tube, dimly lit by flickering yellow bulbs. It was unheated, acting as a bridge over the shifting ice. Marcus was staring at his monitors when the power grid suddenly surged. The main generator coughed, and the light in the communications hub dimmed for a terrifying second before coming back on. A warning light flashed on his console. The primary heating unit in the residential module had tripped a breaker. If it wasn't reset manually within 20 minutes, his sleeping crewmates would freeze to death in their beds. Marcus grabbed his heavy parka and his flashlight. He opened the heavy pressure door and stepped into Tunnel C. The cold hit him instantly. His breath plumed in the freezing air. The wind outside was screaming against the thin metal walls, making the entire tunnel vibrate. The long, yellow-lit corridor stretched out in front of him, curving slightly so he couldn't see the end. He started walking, the sound of his heavy boots clanking against the metal floor grates echoed loudly in the narrow space. Clank, clank, clink. He walked past the halfway point. The yellow bulbs above him flickered violently in the storm. And then the wind outside stopped. It didn't just die down. It completely, unnaturally stopped. The deafening roar of the blizzard was instantly replaced by a dead, heavy silence. Marcus froze in the middle of the tunnel. The sudden silence made his ears ring. He stood perfectly still, listening. From the far end of the dark tunnel, coming from the direction of the residential module, he heard a sound. It was the sound of footsteps on the metal grate. Clank, clank, clank. Marcus let out a sigh of relief. He assumed the power surge had woken one of his crewmates, and they were coming to check on him. He called out, echoing down the long metal tube. "Hey, it is Marcus. The heater tripped. I am coming to reset it. The footsteps stopped immediately. No one answered. Marcus frowned. He unclipped his heavy flashlight and shined the beam down the tunnel. The yellow bulbs were too dim to penetrate the shadows at the curve. He yelled louder, "Guys, this isn't funny. It is freezing out here. Who is there?" Silence. The heavy, dead silence of the ice. Marcus swallowed hard. He took a slow, cautious step forward, clank. And from the darkness ahead, a single footstep answered him. Clink. It wasn't a crewmate playing a joke. The footstep didn't sound like a heavy winter boot. It sounded wet. It sounded like bare skin slapping against freezing metal. Marcus stopped breathing. His heart pounded in his chest. It was impossible for someone to be barefoot in this temperature. Their skin would instantly stick to the frozen steel grates and tear off. He raised his flashlight, his hands shaking violently. Slowly, from the shadows at the end of the tunnel, a figure stepped into the dim, yellow light. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and it was completely naked. Its skin was a pale, translucent blue, completely devoid of any hair or warmth. Its limbs were far too long, dragging slightly against the metal walls of the tunnel. But the most terrifying thing was its face. It didn't have any eyes. It just had a massive, gaping hole where a mouth should be, silently screaming into the freezing air. Marcus couldn't move. He was trapped in a narrow metal tube with a monster that should not exist. The creature didn't run. It took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The wet, slapping sound echoed in the tunnel. Marcus didn't wait for it to take another step. He turned around and ran. He sprinted back toward the communications hub, slipping on the frosted metal grates, tearing his hands on the walls. He heard the wet, slapping footsteps behind him, moving impossibly fast, rapidly closing the distance. He reached the heavy pressure door of the hub. He slammed his body against it, turned the heavy locking wheel, and threw himself inside. He spun around and locked the heavy deadbolts just as something massive slammed into the other side of the door. Boom, boom, boom. The thick steel door dented inward with every terrifying strike. Marcus backed away, grabbing the emergency radio. He screamed into the microphone, calling the residential module. A sleepy voice answered through the static. It was the station commander. "Marcus, what is going on? Why are you screaming?" Marcus cried into the radio. "There is something in the tunnel. It chased me. Lock your doors." There was a long, terrifying pause on the radio. And then the commander's voice came back, sounding completely confused and terrified. "Marcus, what are you talking about? We are all in the residential module, but the heavy pressure door to Tunnel C, it was ripped open from the outside." The commander took a shaky breath over the radio. "Marcus, whatever is out there, it didn't come from the tunnel. It came from inside here with us. and it just walked out to find you. We fear the dark because it hides the unknown. But what happens when you are trapped at the bottom of the world? In the longest night in human history, and you realize that the unknown is locked inside the box with you. Stay tuned for our fourth and final chapter. We will return to civilization, to a place we all know, the empty school. Welcome to our fourth and final chapter. Over the past 50 minutes, we have walked through the decaying remains of a shopping mall. We have felt the freezing terror of an underground morgue, and we have survived the darkest, most isolated night at the bottom of the world. But our final liminal space is one that almost every single person watching this video has been inside. It is a place of learning, of chaos, of youth, and of bright fluorescent lights. But when the final bell rings, the yellow buses drive away and the sun goes down, the building transforms into something entirely different. The long hallways become dark tunnels. The empty classrooms feel like they are holding their breath. This is Chapter 4, The Empty School. Arthur was a 60-year-old custodian who had worked at a large, 2-story high school in a quiet suburban town for over 15 years. He knew every crack in the floor tiles, every creaking pipe, and every broken locker. He usually worked the evening shift, finishing up around 11 p.m. But over the long Thanksgiving break, the school was completely shut down. The principal asked Arthur to come in at 2 in the morning to do a massive, deep clean and floor wax of the main hallway before the students returned. Arthur agreed. It was just an empty building. He had nothing to be afraid of. He unlocked the heavy front glass doors at exactly 2 a.m. The school was pitch black, except for the dim red glow of the emergency exit signs. The absolute silence of the massive building pressed against his ears. He walked down the main corridor to his janitor closet. He filled his mop bucket, grabbed his heavy flashlight, and started working. The main hallway was over 300 feet long, lined on both sides with hundreds of dark blue metal lockers. Arthur was working near the center of the hallway, the rhythmic slosh of his mop echoing loudly in the dark. At exactly 3:15 a.m., he heard a sound that made him stop dead in his tracks. It came from the far end of the dark hallway, near the gymnasium. It was the heavy, metallic sound of a locker door slamming shut. Bang! Arthur dropped his mop. The sound echoed down the corridor and faded into absolute silence. He knew he was the only person in the building. He had locked the front doors behind him. The alarm system on all the exterior windows was armed. He pulled his flashlight from his belt and shined the beam down the long, dark hallway. The circle of light illuminated the rows of blue lockers, but there was no one standing there. He took a slow step forward. His old shoes squeaked on the wet floor. He called out, his voice shaking slightly. "Hello, is someone down there?" "The building is closed." No answer. He convinced himself that it was just an old locker with a broken latch popping open due to a change in air pressure. He walked slowly down the hallway to check. He reached locker number 240. The door was standing wide open, exposing the dark, empty space inside. Arthur sighed, shaking his head. He reached out and slammed the metal door shut. Dang. He turned around to walk back to his mop bucket. But as he swept his flashlight down the hallway he had just walked past, his blood ran completely cold. Every single locker door on the left side of the hallway, stretching all the way back to the front entrance, was standing wide open. Dozens of them, all perfectly open at exactly a 90-degree angle. Arthur's hands began to shake violently. He hadn't heard a single sound. It takes time and noise to open 50 heavy metal lockers, but they had opened silently in the 5 seconds his back was turned. He backed up until his shoulders hit the wall. He was breathing heavily, terrified. Someone or something was playing a very dark game with him. He raised his radio to call the police, but before his thumb could press the button, the public address system above his head crackled to life with a loud burst of static. The PA system was located in the locked principal's office on the other side of the building. Through the static, a voice echoed through the dark, empty school. It wasn't an adult's voice. It was the voice of a young child, whispering directly into the microphone. The child's voice giggled softly and then whispered a single, terrifying sentence. "Tag, you are it." And then, every single open locker door in the hallway slammed shut at the exact same mathematical second. Bang. The deafening explosion of metal hitting metal physically knocked Arthur to his knees. The noise echoed like a gunshot through the empty school. Arthur didn't stand back up. He scrambled on his hands and knees on the wet floor, completely blinded by panic, crawling toward the front exit. He looked back over his shoulder. At the far end of the dark hallway, under the red glow of the exit sign, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It wasn't a child. It was a massive, shifting mass of darkness that seemed to absorb the light from his flashlight, and it dropped down onto all 4 limbs like a massive hunting dog. It started sprinting down the hallway toward him. Arthur scrambled to his feet, threw himself against the heavy glass front doors, unlocked the deadbolt, and fell out into the freezing night air. He didn't stop running until he reached his truck, locked the doors, and peeled out of the parking lot. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, they searched the entire school with flashlights and tracking dogs. The building was completely empty. The principal's office was locked. The microphone on the PA desk was untouched, covered in a thin layer of dust. But when they checked the main hallway, they found something that made the veteran officers sick to their stomachs. Arthur's mop bucket had been knocked over, and written on the wet floor using the dirty mop water, was a single word: run. Over the past hour, we have taken a dark journey into the true meaning of liminal spaces. We have seen how the empty buildings we build for ourselves can turn into traps. We have learned that when the crowds leave and the lights go out, the silence is never truly empty. Nature hates a vacuum. And if a massive space is left in the dark for too long, something from the dark will eventually step in to fill it. The next time you are the last person to leave your office, or you walk through an empty parking garage at night, or you find yourself completely alone in a long, quiet hallway, pay close attention to the shadows and listen carefully to the silence, because you might just hear something breathing back. Thank you for surviving this 1-hour journey into the terrifying reality of liminal spaces. If you made it to the very end of this documentary, leave a comment down below and tell me which of these 4 empty places terrified you the most. If you want to hear more deep dives into the dark, the unsolved, and the unknown, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell and give this video a like. Stay safe, never work the night shift alone, and I will see you in the next nightmare.